to let you know that the next class following this one is Exploring the Luminous Web with Lucy Forster-Smith and Jim Ford. And that begins May 22nd and runs through June 12th. So let us open in prayer. Heavenly Father, be with us this morning as we continue our exploration of practical ways in which we can care for this precious planet you have entrusted to us. May we learn to view these caring steps as a way to move closer to you, dear Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Before I forget too, let me remind everyone that next week is our final week, but we are actually not meeting in this room. We are meeting on the 5th floor. I think it's 5G, but come up and you'll find us easily. There's going to be a recording going on in here, so please don't get carried away by the glitter and glam of being part of a podcast recording. Please instead come up to the 5th floor and join us, because next week is going to be, I think it's going to be pretty fun. We're going to, every week I said is a standalone week, but we also are sort of building a little bit so that by next week I hope we'll be so motivated and engaged that we'll be asking, how can I advocate in my city, in my country, in my world for next week. But today we are also kind of continuing along the journey. The first few weeks we really focused more on personal things that we can do. And so I do want to start by giving us a chance to share some of those. Last week I encouraged everyone to think, is there something that you would like to do, a small tweak or change that you'd like to make in your life that might allow you to contribute more to sustainable living? And I'm curious, did anybody try something this past week that worked for them? Polly?
I finally used my non-plastic, non-disposable produce bags that had been in my cupboard, Amy, as something I bought from Pampered Chef to make a certain dollar amount. And I took them to the grocery store expecting potential pushback from the cashier, but no problem. The tear is right on the bags, that they deduct. So
perfect.
Very smoothly, and now I don't have to use all those plastic bags because I buy so much produce. And
Perfect. It's a great example of something Polly did that was easy, just bringing in your own produce bags. And some of us have, people who know that I'm kind of into this stuff often give them to me as gifts. So I have a lot of them. But if you don't think that you need to go and spend lots of money, you could very easily just take the free plastic bags at the grocery store and use them like week after week in the produce department. Or a lot of produce, does it really need to be in a bag? If it's an onion or a potato or something where you're gonna take the skin off anyway, just put it in your cart, put it on the conveyor belt. It's okay. It's not gonna be dirty, So yeah, that's a great simple example. Anybody else try something simple and easy this week? Yeah, Meg, and then.
I got those laundry sheets, laundry detergent sheets.
Yeah.
That I had ordered, and so I tried them this week, and they seem to work well.
Great.
I want to try them again.
Earth Breeze. So they're just instead of buying like a big thing, a Woolite or a big jug, you just got like a sheet and it dissolves when you put it in the washer.
Yeah, you tear them up, and I was concerned that you might not be able to use them in those front-loading larger.
Mm-hmm.
But you can. You just where you put in the detergent, you just tear it up into pieces and put it in. And then it washes through. Then it just washes.
Nice.
It seemed to work.
Easy peasy. I love it. Thank you. Were you going to share something too?
Yeah, I just made a call to the city of Evanston because I heard this thing on NPR about not mowing your lawn in May.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't mow your lawn for that month, I guess it's really good for the bee population. And they spotlighted a smallish town in Wisconsin.
Okay.
That did it. So it seemed like a very Evanston thing to do.
Yeah.
So I called over there and they said someone would call back.
Okay. I love it. No, I've been hearing about No Mow May. My children are early adopters of No Mow May because they're really happy that they don't have to start mowing the lawn until June, right? So that's a win-win, right? Exactly. But if we could do it on a wider scale. I love it. Anybody else? Or maybe you have something that you've already been doing for years that you're excited about and you want to share, and that's incredible too. Anybody else want to share something before we get moving? Awesome. Well, these are great little examples, and I was telling somebody earlier. This week I ran into just at a pizza place. I ran into somebody who I knew from a few years ago who had been at a women's retreat that I had done on this topic, and she was like, "Oh, Amy, it's so good to see you. I want you to know we're composting." They started composting, and her kids were there, and she made her kids like say, "Yeah, it's not that hard. You know, we figured it out." So these small things can add up. So that's kind of where we've been starting with the small things that add up, right? Things that we can do. And I think those are incredibly important, and I think it's a good place to start, right? Because it helps us to make a personal connection with the environment when we're doing something small to protect God's creation. Okay, now here's the bad news, the tough stuff, right? We also know that that's not enough, right? It's important to do these things, but we also know that we've moved pretty quickly down the path as a country, as a world, as a planet, right? And that's not going to be enough. So we need to start talking about the harder things. And so I want to remind us, we can do hard things, right? We've done hard things before. We can do hard things again. And so we're going to start talking now about some of the more challenging things. And the first thing is that somewhere in the past few years, if you kind of have been paying attention to the media, the language shifted. We used to talk about what we can do to prevent climate change, and now we started talking about, well, now that climate change is clearly happening, here's what we need to do. And so I think that just needs to be our going in position. And I'm not saying that from a position of doom and gloom, right? Just because, if we look at climate change as a sort of thermometer, we're not, the thermometer isn't entirely red yet, right? The red is there, and it will continue to climb without intervention. But with intervention, we can at least steady or stop the progress of that danger red thermometer growing. What's happened? Well, in the past 100 years, the Earth's temperatures have increased 2 degrees, and we're on track to continue increasing at our current rate. People will say, there are weather patterns, things are cyclical, and that's true. However, this is simply where we are. And so without human intervention, the temperatures are going to continue to climb. We've noticed a lot of extreme weather. People will say, well, we've always had storms. We've always had periods of drought and heavy rain. Again, that's absolutely true. What has changed is the intensity of these. So you might notice that we've had a lot of tropical storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, but they're just more destructive than they have been in the past. Same with drought and heavy rain. Anybody, we talked about a CSA. Carol, you shared your experience of some of us get our vegetables from a farmer. And so when you buy into that model, you also buy into the farmer educating you every week on the challenges of producing food. So we've been part of the same community supported agriculture farm for like 15, 20 years now. And so we hear every week from this farmer like just how challenging it is to produce food with the weather extremes. One year it was drought, and he was talking all about, thank goodness he had invested in irrigation because he couldn't count on, the fact that there was no rain for 6 weeks, 8 weeks throughout the summer. More recently, it's been the heavy rains. And you might think, well, that's good for vegetables, right? Because we need April showers, bring May flowers. But what happens is that the ground gets so saturated that it's really next to impossible to pull some of the crops out of the ground. And so this farmer who has worked so hard has to then take a machine and just squish all the broccoli back into the ground to fertilize it for next year because it's so filled with mud you can't get it out. So we start to see those kinds of extremes, and it just makes it more difficult to produce food. And then we also see the shrinking glaciers and the melting ice. that doesn't impact us immediately. It starts by impacting, like in the Arctic. We've all seen the concerns about polar bears on the little tiny bits of ice. But of course, with time, it impacts us as well, because as sea level has risen by 8 inches over the last 150 years or so, it's going to continue rising, projected 1 to 8 feet. And so there are islands that are in immediate danger, and then our coastal cities are endangered. And so all of this is simply just where we are. So we have to then ask ourselves, what do we do, right? If we acknowledge that all of the personal choices we make are important, but that can make us feel like we're carrying the weight on our shoulders. And let me just say that's not fair, right? Like we can't, even if we make really perfect choices, it's not going to change the fact that there are industries that are disproportionately contributing to this situation. And so it's kind of small writing, so don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. But these are the greatest culprits in terms of contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation, and so that's the airlines, it's trucks that are bringing goods around the country, it's cars, it's all of these that are contributing. Electricity that's used to run all the things around us. Of course we need it, but it is contributing about a quarter. Transportation is a little more than a quarter. Electricity is contributing about a quarter, and then almost a quarter is industry. So manufacturing and all of the plants that are making products and that are contributing to all of the things that we need and use. The smaller segments are really commercial and residential. So that's us, that's our homes. You can see, like, even if we make fabulous choices in our homes, it's still a small percentage. And then agriculture, so the production of food. So again, like, we can buy local food, we can grow our own food if we're so inclined, but it's still gonna have a small impact. However, all of these are intertwined, right? So I do want to encourage us to make those personal choices, because if we're making a personal choice to purchase something, right, it runs through all of these different industries. If we purchase an item, first the plant is manufacturing it, they're using electricity, they're putting it on a truck, and they're shipping it to us. So all of these, are certainly, our personal choices are contributing to these. But our personal choices aren't going to solve the problem. We can, however, use our voice as advocates, and we'll talk more about next week about how we do that through political systems, things like that. But we can make choices to encourage businesses to do things differently. And this is where we've talked about, like, businesses are there to make money. If they know that we're not going to buy their product because we are concerned about the environment, they will find a different product to sell, right? And so that's where we can make choices. And again, I realize this is really small, so don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. But we just said that transportation was a big factor here, right? So we can make different choices in transportation. And of course, living in Chicago, we have public transportation, so that's always a great option. But we can also make different choices with the companies around supporting electric cars or electric buses. The CTA started a number of years ago when they replaced buses, replacing them with electric buses. And I searched on that and I found some things back from 2014, but I didn't find anything since then. So sometimes I think what happens, we sometimes call this greenwashing. A company wants to appear more green, and so there's maybe a big splash around doing something that's good for the environment. But then once they kind of get the initial publicity, they kind of like slide, into something that's more convenient for them. So this is where we as consumers can continue to to hold them accountable. By saying, hey, I saw CTA, I saw City of Chicago, that you are investing in buses that don't run on fossil fuels. And what are you setting targets? Are you meeting those targets? Are those targets enough? And we can continue to hold them accountable. That's more of an advocacy thing with something like the CTA. but in the choices that we make around transportation, we can do that too. So this is an ad I got in my email the other day from American Airlines. And here's American Airlines is saying that they are the first airline to commit to targets and to have that target approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So I looked up what is the Science Based Targets Initiative, and it turns out it's an organization that says, you know, the international community got together with the Paris Agreement and said, if we are going to combat climate change, all of these countries need to agree to particular targets, and those are science-based targets that say in order to kind of stop the effects of climate change, we need to hold our planet's temperatures to a certain level. If we increase 1 more degree, we're kind of cutting it close. If we increase 2 more degrees, like the effects are just not going to be good. So let's set our target at that 1 degree or less. And so here's American Airlines coming out and saying, this is what we want to do. So we can fly American Airlines if we're going to choose to fly, and we can say to them, okay, I will fly you if I believe you're sincere in this. Show me how you're doing this. We can do that by, like you just said, making a phone call to the city of Evanston, right? We can make a phone call. We can go online and see how they're doing. We can go on social media and comment. And then again, like one person doing that, probably not going to really have much of an impact, but thousands of people, tens of thousands of people doing that, shareholders doing that, right? If we're really kind of looking at these companies that say they're going to try to do the right thing for the environment, and we're going to hold them accountable, that's where we're going to see larger scale change, because that's what needs to happen. And there are alternatives out there. You know, what we're realizing is there are alternatives to fossil fuels. And again, when cities and states and municipalities start to invest in them, they become big business. You know, green energy is a huge growth area. And it's a huge growth area, not just for like companies that want to do green energy, but for fossil fuel companies to realize like we're putting all of our eggs in an increasingly unpopular basket. So we need to branch out into green energy. And by if we as consumers are demanding that of them, that will speed up the likelihood that they're going to do that.
Amy?
Yes.
I think that the CTA, I don't know the numbers, but I think the CTA is making an inroad into purchasing electric buses. I was just on one last week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I mean, you don't see them everywhere, but
Right.
all of a sudden the 22 shows up and I don't, what is this thing?
It's an electric.
But,
That's
yeah,
cool. I love it.
They are purchasing much more.
Thank you for that. That's great. So that's a great example too. When we see somebody doing that, like let them know. Thank you. Congratulations. Nice job, CTA, right? So using both the positive and negative reinforcement to get that to happen. I love it. Thank you. And we can do the same thing with all these other industries, right? So I did a little bit of research on what is going on out there. And for example, the steel industry accounts for 5 to 8% of the world's carbon dioxide. So a major culprit. And we might think, well, but we need steel. So what are we supposed to do? Well, there's a Swedish company that was testing an alternative, and they found out ways of creating steel that is fossil fuel free. Right? So as we see kind of R&D that is figuring out ways to do that, that's the kind of thing that governments can support, that private equity can support, that we kind of put our voice behind. Shipping is a big culprit. One of the things I found that I thought was astonishing is that 40% of the shipping that happens in the world is simply to transport fossil fuels from one place to the next, right? Because, and mining takes a lot of energy too. So you've got like this kind of triple threat, right? You're taking something out of the ground that's unhealthy. You're using a lot of energy to extract it from the ground. Then you're putting it on a ship or in a pipeline, and you're sending it around the world in a way that sometimes has disastrous consequences, that is also very expensive and fuel intensive to do. So you might think like that's really bad news. But maybe it's actually really good news, right? Because it says if we invest more heavily in green energy, we kind of get like a win-win-win because we are decreasing our reliance on fossil fuels in a big way. I consider that good news. And I think the final piece of good news around that, I think that this horrible situation right now with the Ukraine has also really illustrated to our country the risks of relying on fossil fuels that increasingly, either if we want to get them in our country, we increasingly have to encroach on protected lands and wildlife. If we want to get them from other countries, we increasingly need to rely on unstable regimes and places where they have rulers that we may not want to do business with. And so when we kind of look at our national security, we start to see how caring for the environment and protecting our national security really go hand in hand. So we're really starting to see that by choosing alternatives, we're not only doing the right thing as Christians, we're doing the right thing as Americans and as citizens of the planet. You made a great comment, so I want to take a minute and stop and see if anybody else has a question or a comment you'd like to share.
One of the most shocking things through the shutdown I read was that I think it was Lufthansa was flying like 700 planes around the world empty just to keep their gate not assignment, but their ability to fly out of certain airports. They had to be there and do that. So they flew hundreds of empty planes.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
So that's a great, the point that Lufthansa was flying empty airplanes just to sort of keep their presence in these airports. The idea that we've set up systems and rewards that reward the wrong behavior, right? And there was even during COVID, there were even some airlines that were doing these flights to nowhere. I don't know if you saw that, that people could have the experience of flying and would go somewhere and then just come straight back, right? Because the idea that you could make it like a first class experience and then it would be a fun night out for people. And I saw that and I was like, okay, I was a consultant. The idea of like putting me on a flight for no reason, no thank you. I spent way too much time on planes, in my 20s. But like, really? Like, is that, you could also do like farm to nowhere, right? Like you could go out on a farm and enjoy a beautiful meal, like there's so many other things that would be life-giving and wonderful ways to celebrate the kinds of things so really kind of taking a step, I pity the airlines trying to stay in business during that time. So I know people were just being creative, but for goodness sakes, like we need to.
Yeah.
I mean, the air travel plus like Amazon. Air travel is a terrible pollutant that we forget about it because it's very convenient and it's kind of out there. It's not like being stuck on the Dan Ryan behind trucks. It's out there, but it's a terrible pollutant.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Absolutely. I do think that's something I'm hopeful about too. And and of course, this is one of these things we make personal choices. I fly. I like to go places, and so recognizing that sometimes we're going to make a choice that we know is not like the perfect choice, but recognizing that's in my opinion that's kind of why I do a lot of other things, so that when we recognize, because we always have competing values. There's the value of wanting to be a citizen of the world, wanting to visit family, wanting to see places, and experience the beauty of the earth, but recognizing that we don't want to do that so haphazardly that we're also contributing, contributing more than our fair share, which it's a challenge, right? Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, please.
I'm really concerned about, just the fractious nature of our political system within the United States. And there's so many states that I won't mention, and I won't mention any political parties, but there are fights. It's just ironic that American Airlines is based in Texas.
Yes.
And they've got the most the biggest climate deniers running the government there. If I were an environmental activist, I would be holding American Airlines to the fire on their so-called statements, because I don't believe a word of it. I mean, they're down in Texas and they're being protected by tax havens and everything else, and I don't believe that for a second.
You've mentioned a couple of different issues, right? The first, the issue of the divisiveness in our country and climate denial. I want to recommend a book that I think everybody here would appreciate. It's called Saving Us by Katharine Hayhoe, and she is one of the world's foremost authorities on the environment and on the climate, and she is actually located in Texas. And so it is, but she talks what I really, and we're going to use her book a little bit next week too. So that's a little teaser. Come back next week, because what she talks about is the importance of how do we have conversations with people, and the fact that like facts are no longer sacred. That you can put all the facts out there, and people. She's actually an evangelical Christian as well, and so she says that. We've become so polarized that we treat our political affiliation as almost like a religion, and the idea that so when we come up against something a fact that interferes with our religious belief around the environment, around the climate, we just say, well, that's not what I believe. We can just reject that fact. And so what she does is she talks about, like when she goes and talks to different groups, is the importance of finding a shared value and starting from the place of that shared value. So like she'll go and talk to a group of farmers in Texas, and instead of talking about climate change or global warming, she'll talk about the soil. She'll talk about the rain. She'll talk about things that and the farmers will come up to her afterward and be like, that was great. I totally think that climate change is a hoax, but you're absolutely right. We need to stop this warming of the planet. Because she's not forcing them to admit that they were wrong, or so how do we, I'm hoping that we'll all come out of this, not just with some facts, but with a thinking of how do I have a conversation with somebody who really is different than I am? And I could talk about that all day, but I feel like that's not only helpful with climate change, but when I'm seeing the divisiveness right now around Roe versus Wade this past week and around abortion, I'm seeing the divisiveness around political parties, this idea of how do we find things that are a shared value and speak from that place rather than from this polarized place of fighting, because I'm sick of that. That's for sure. And sorry, I'm going to peek ahead here. I want us to move kind of quickly. So what I'll do is I'm going to continue, and then if anybody's interested, I've got some little short videos and stuff here. So at the end, anybody who wants to watch them, we can certainly come and do that. But we've just been talking quite a bit about the biggest culprits being fossil fuels, right? And what do we do about that? Because we need energy. Right? We need to have lights, we need to go places, all of those are kind of non-negotiables. And to your point, if we sort of present, what's happened is that we kind of present climate change as a bit of a threat to the American way of life. And then people kind of dig in, no, you can't tell me how to live, I'm an American, this is, and so what we're instead saying, no, we're not saying that we need to, we can't enjoy life, right? But we're saying we need to make some shifts in how we do that. And some of the easiest ways to do that are to recognize that alternatives to fossil fuels already exist. And in places where they are being invested in, they are really very reliable alternatives. Interestingly, the biggest challenge is not around those alternatives, but around storage of those alternatives, right? Because we have unlimited power from the sun and from the wind, but we also need to harness that and store it. And so if anybody gets the New Yorker just this last week or two ago, I think there was an article about how they're working on sort of huge batteries that will allow us to store the energy that we take from the wind and from the sun. If anybody's ever had a chance to drive across the country, we did that during COVID, and we saw wind farms everywhere. It's already here, right? The technology is here. It's not perfect because, of course, making those big windmills takes energy and it takes money. But the more that we invest in it, the more that there's a motivation for people, for companies to figure out how to do it in the most environmentally friendly way. Yeah, Meg.
Do you know anything? You would know. I'm asking. What about birds being killed by the wind farm?
I do know that is an issue, but it's not such, it doesn't happen on such a scale that we would, I think, say that therefore it's not a reliable alternative, because certainly wildlife are threatened by mining coal, by mining oil, all of the other things. And so again, it's companies figuring out how to do it in the safest possible way. But I'll do some more research on that too and see if I can share something about that next week.
This is the Norwegian wood.
Oh, that's actually a different one.
Yeah, they're building skyscrapers from in Scandinavia from pine and spruce.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow. Oh, my goodness.
That's
I love it. Thank you. I haven't either. I'm always a couple weeks behind, so I will read that too, and then we can chat about it next week. I love it. And even, companies are also being increasingly creative. If you go up to Loyola, they have a wonderful education around sustainability there, and they have a great place you can tour and you can see what they're up to. And they take cooking oil from local businesses, from the cafeteria there, and one of the things their students learn how to do is how to turn that cooking oil into gas that we use to run our cars. And they will sell it to local businesses. They have like a shuttle bus service on campus that runs entirely on this biofuel. And so that's an example. They're doing it on a very small scale. But if it catches on and there's a market for it, it will ramp up. And so that's, you can also turn corn into fuel, but one of the concerns with that is corn is also a food, right? And it's a food that goes to animals, it's a food that goes to humans, and so that's a little more controversial. But the oil that your French fries were cooked in is just gonna end up in the trash. And so if there's a way of converting it into gasoline for a car, yes, please. I think that's a great example. So there are lots of ways that we can do this, right? And so we just kind of hinted at some of this about how is our faith a resource for all of this. And we just talked here about the divisiveness, right? And so we get to there's a story that's being told that the environment is somehow connected with liberalism. It's not faith-based. It's not connected to people who want to protect the American way of life. And we need to push back against that story. That story is not helpful and it's not true, right? As we've explored here, there is sort of a God-given way of life, and it's about living abundantly, living joyfully, taking advantage of all of the beautiful resources that our world has to offer. And so we can do that by kind of reframing what it means to live abundantly, and then exploring and kind of living into this idea that God has given us of Sabbath. And so I want to start with that just by kind of reframing, what I don't know if you've seen lately, there's been some wonderful conversations around the spirituality of naps and rest as resistance.
I tried to read the New Yorker about that, and then I fell asleep.
And you fell asleep. Story of my life, thank you. So but that's right, the idea that this idea that we always have to be go, go, go is really a part of a capitalistic society. That time is money, you've got to manage our time, we need to always be going. And so what if instead we say, hey, my creator didn't make me to always be going. My creator made me to just be, and that's okay, right? And as part of that, to say, therefore, part of why everybody wants us to go is when we do, we consume, right? And that generates revenue for businesses. And so I understand that, but what if we say, you know what, we're not always going to be consumers, we're going to be stewards, right? We're going to look at ourselves differently. And so, you know, it's tied to the idea of Sabbath. And I've got a little picture here to remind us of Sabbath time can be truly getting away, but Sabbath time can also be just carving out time where we choose not to consume. And so one of the things, you know, I've done, we don't keep the Sabbath in a traditional kind of old-fashioned view of Sabbath, right? However, a few years ago, I said, you know, what if I used to come to church here, and then I would like go over to Water Tower and go shopping because I was already here. It was so convenient. And I started thinking like, boy, that's really not what I want to do. So what if I just like don't do that? And then I was like, well, but then am I going to go shop the other days? And I was like, well, no, what if I just don't and see what happens? Turned out that was kind of nice, right? But now it's so easy with online. You can shop 24/7, right? So what if, and then I thought, well, okay, well, what if I just don't buy anything online? Well, what if I just don't buy anything on Amazon, right? Or if I am going to shop, what if I do it in my local community, in the little stores that I like so much, where I know the owners and I know and my neighbors are there. You know, so it's kind of just about like reframing all of that. And as a part of that, one of the things I came across that I thought was really troubling is because our society is so geared to this idea that we can consume 24/7, online retailers can no longer keep up with the demand of our returns. So they give us something, there's free shipping and free returns, right? So they send us something, it doesn't fit, we send it back, they can't keep up with that. It goes in the landfill. Not 100% of the time, but enough. I've got the number right here. In the year 2020, retail returns produced nearly 6 billion pounds of waste, right? So all of that energy being used to bring something to us and ship it back, and then it just goes right in the landfill. So it's a way of kind of thinking like, I don't want to be a part of that cycle. And so I'm not a purist. I recognize there are times when you legitimately need something, or like sometimes Amazon is the only place you can get it. But when you do make that choice, making sure it's a very conscious and intentional choice, choosing wherever possible the slowest shipping, just because I can request something and Amazon can have it to me within 24 hours. Do I need it within 24 hours? You know, can I let it wait a week so that the employees are able to use the restroom while they're on the job and they're not being forced to work so quickly to get me the things that I believe I need? You know, really just kind of asking ourselves these choices and realizing that that is not just a choice we make because we're humans, but a choice that we make because we're Christians, because we're people of faith. Because we realize that abundance doesn't necessarily mean that we can have all the stuff as quickly as we possibly can, but more that it means that we have what we need when we need it, and just enough so that others can experience that abundance as well. And so that's where I want us to think about today is there, we've talked about some of the small choices that we make, but based on what we talked about today, is there anything else that we might consider doing differently that we want to kind of try on in the next week? Something come to mind?
One quick thing.
Yeah.
Like talking about Amazon, everyone knows about their packaging, how much packaging.
Yes.
I mean, talk about waste.
Yeah.
But like, yes, we can begin by not shopping at Amazon.
Right.
But is there anything else we can do, because it's everywhere?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. And again, like I'm going to put a bunch of stuff out there and you choose like what works within your time and everything. But Local free boxes are a good way to go. If you're on social media, you can sign, like I live in Ravenswood, so I joined the Ravenswood free box. So say you need something, you can put out like in search of whatever, and if somebody has it, they'll say, yep, come pick it up on my porch. And then if you want to get rid of something, you do the same thing. And so we've kind of created a little bit of like a, kind of a reuse economy, because there's no packaging when that happens. I mean, you can buy something used on, on Craigslist, you can buy something used at the Goodwill, but you may not have the time to be, going and doing all of that. And so a free box is a quick and easy way. We can advocate, if we are going to shop Amazon, they have like all these different kinds of packaging, and I really don't know why they don't just 100% of the time choose the paper recyclable packaging. We can advocate that they should. But what I also do, in Chicago, a thing, again, if you're on Facebook, you'll find this Eco Ship, it's called. And it's just people like us, who decided that they wanted to kind of gather up everybody's mailing envelopes and reuse them. And so you just find a drop-off site, and it can be like in a local store, or it can be in somebody's front porch, depending on where you live, and you drop off your shipping envelopes. And then they basically work with small businesses so that the small businesses are reusing those to ship. Now, it's not perfect. Eventually, that stuff's going to end up in the landfill, or if it can't be recycled. But it's a way of like reusing as many times as we can. So I think that helps. It's really a bummer. Like, there was a time I needed an umbrella, and I went to like 5 different local stores, and they didn't have umbrellas because they're so used to like, oh, people don't come in here for an umbrella, they get it on Amazon. And so eventually I needed the umbrella, and I got it on Amazon, and I was so bummed, right, that I couldn't just buy a freaking umbrella. But that's sort of the mess that we've kind of gotten ourselves into. So as we detangle ourselves from that mess, at least like trying to figure out what can we do better in the meantime. Yeah, good question. Other questions or other thoughts about something that you might want to try? Yeah.
Well, I'm an old lady, and I've been reading a newspaper
Yes,
all my
ma'am.
life,
Yes.
and I'm very careful about putting it in the recycling bin. I don't, and people say, well, just read the thing digital, and I don't know, I just like to have the newspaper. Am I a bad girl?
So you're lifting up, no, you are not. You are a lovely, wonderful human being. You are not a bad human, so it's okay. But I'm right there with you. I love the Sunday paper. I do the Sunday paper like in hard copy, and then during the week I read online. But I totally get that. And again, it's like a competing priority, right? Because we want to support journalism, because journalism is so important. So I sort of feel like all of these things are like figuring out where are the pain points for you, and where are the things that you can give up, and then just trying to make those choices. And so if you're gonna read the paper, just embrace that paper, right? No, and then recycle it when you're done. But then you're making other choices because you're taking public transportation. You're doing other things. So figure out what works for you, I think.
People have told me that I've been careful about recycling plastic and putting my newspapers in the bin. But people have told me that the recycling program in Chicago only takes care of about 10%
It does.
of the stuff you put in the bins.
Yeah.
So now I'm feeling even worse about reading this thing, because I'm thinking, oh my God,
Well, that's something we can.
what?
That's something we can start pushing on, because we all know it's an inefficient.
Yeah.
But I didn't know.
Not a good system at all.
What's the issue there? Is it just manpower that people don't want to sort?
It's not.
Yeah.
Part of it, so what you can do is just try to find the most reliable place to recycle. The issue is that people contaminate recycling bins. So like if the trash comes along and it's half recycling and half trash, they're not gonna sort it out. They're just gonna dump it in the trash. So you could try to find like the most, like a place that just takes paper recycling. You can also, like the Humane Society Society or Anti-Cruelty Society will take some newspapers sometimes because they use them for the animals, so you might see another place where you can offload it. I feel like we kind of do the best we can with recycling, but we also recognize that recycling's not enough for the reasons that you're sharing. Yeah. You were was that what you were going to say too?
Recycling, about how can we be assured that it really is working?
Yeah. Yeah, and we really can't, which is the bummer. And I've even taken, like, because you can also take your stuff to a place, like, right, where you can recycle, which is a little bit more pure because but like so many times those get filled up and then they lock them up. And so you get there, and you can't be driving, if you're like driving all over the city to recycle, well, that kind of undermines the purposes, right, if it's not someplace that's near you. So we do the best we can, but last week we talked, it used to be the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. Now it's the 5 R's, and recycling isn't even one of them anymore. It's that before we try to recycle, I might not remember them all, but we should reduce, repair, repurpose, reuse, I forget what the 5th one is, because recycling is such an imperfect system.
And it's interesting because what happened, the places that repair things have all closed. Like the vacuum cleaner place where I went for years, they're like, we don't have the business.
Right.
People don't repair TVs.
Right.
So it's almost like, wow, forces work against progress.
And that's where, like, if you're part of one of these, again, like if anybody's on Facebook, like joining like Chicago Environmentalists or anything like that, that's where you're gonna find resources like that. Like they'll do pop-ups at local libraries. Like people who know how to like repair things will volunteer their time. Like my food processor, the thing broke last week, and I am like determined to find somebody who knows how to fix this because I've had it for 20 years and I really wanna get a few more years out of it, so I'm trying to bring it to one of these little pop-up. There's a pop-up mending thing. I've got a sweater I love. And there's a woman who will teach you how to mend it. So I'm gonna do like the pop-up mending thing. So those kinds, again, like these are small things, right? But it's satisfying when you can do something like that. And if you can then share that with others, maybe we can be part of a culture that says, it's no longer about like IKEA everything, or, like clothing that, only is gonna last a season and then you're gonna toss it. And it was so cheap that you don't mind tossing it, right? Again, like if we can create this culture of, let's try to like use things as long as we can be a part of that.
Well, that's why I like the Sabbath idea that you had before, because it's just a mindset and we get pulled into it without realizing it.
Yeah.
But if I was just thinking going to a baseball game, and it's like, I don't have to buy 3 beers and this junk and that junk. When you look at people who go to baseball games all the time, they don't buy the food there. They figure out ways to survive without shelling their money to out their pocket.
Yeah.
But even like a mindset of not shopping on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you start to think, well, I don't need a coat this year. I don't need some little thing that's cost me $40 that's going to make me feel better.
Yeah.
Or they think it's going to make me feel better.
I love the way you said that too, because it's a mindset, right? And it's also like my mom always gives me, you'll meet her next week, she'll be here. But she's like very image conscious. And so like sometimes she gets concerned, like, oh my gosh, are you still wearing that winter coat? You've been wearing it for like 8 years. And it's kind of embarrassing to her. And it is pretty shabby, but man, I love that coat. And I'm like, you know what? I am gonna wear this until the ground, because it's just a way of shifting like what it means to look good, or what it means to like keep up or whatever. So you know what, I'm okay with that, right? So we can do hard things. So what I'd love for us, and I'll stick around for anybody who wants to chat further, but what I'd love for us to do is just to close with, since we're talking Sabbath, close with a little kind of mantra, thinking through the Sabbath. So I'm going to ask this side to start us off, and then that side to read the bold. And if it's too small and you can't read it, just take a deep breath and enjoy. So let's close together.
There are days when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain.
On the Sabbath, we seek not to acquire, but to share.
There are days when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted.
On the Sabbath, we gaze in wonder before the mystery of creation.
There are days when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others.
On the Sabbath, we are reminded that justice is our duty and a better world our goal.
Let's all close together by saying, therefore, we welcome Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, day of peace.
Thank you. A good Sabbath to you all. Thank you. And once again, I'll take everybody's compostable cups if you're finished with them, and I'm happy to compost them, and I'm happy to stick around in case people have questions. And then maybe next week, if you try something new this week, come next week and let us know how it went. And if you don't try something new, but you'd like to try something new, come anyway and tell us about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.